Shus Kvedat Chief Rabbi, Ran Harishon Etzion Shlita, Kvedat Ayonim, Arabonim, Mr. Stephen Pack, all distinguished gathered guests, Chol Kaholo Kadisha Hodein. On Monday evening, as we heard the terrible news that the search had come to its dead end, we were learning a Gemara, a page in Daf Hayomi, which was being learnt on Monday around the world in Daf Hayomi. The Gemara in Tanis, in the tractate Tanis, which speaks about the fasts which are required for extra tefillos, extra merits in times of drought and challenge and tragedy in Klal Yisrael, lists some of the special days on the Jewish calendar which the rabbis, which the Rabbanon instituted. They're listed on a list called Megillas Tanis, the scroll, when you can't fast because it was celebratory days. And the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches discusses a day called Yom Terainus, the 12th of Adar, was known as Yom Terainus, the day of Trajan, some say it was, the father of the emperor Hadrian Yamach Shemai. But he was one of the Roman leaders who was in Eretz Yisrael, Artzeinu HaKadosh, after the Churban, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara says, you know why it was a celebratory day? Because there was a famous incident that occurred on that day with Trinus, or Tarionus. There were two brothers. One was Lulenus, and the other was Pappus. Two Jewish brothers from Ludkia, otherwise known as Lud. The way Rashi explains this is linked to the Gemara in Baba Basra, Daf Yud. And the Gemara tells us that there was an accusation about the ritual murder of the leader of a Roman general, the daughter of a Roman general. And the whole nation was at risk, all the refugees, all the survivors in Eretz Yisrael at the time. And these two brothers came forward. And Tyrannus taunted these two tzaddikim. And he taunted them by saying, you're from the people of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You belong to that nation, you believe in Hashem, in God. And he saved Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah famously as they were thrown into the furnace by Nebuchadnezzar. If that's true, let him save you from my hands and my clutches. And the Gemara goes on to say the following. They turned around and said something stunning. They said, hold on. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were tzaddikim, we're not. Nebuchadnezzar was a king, although in certain ways he was a Rosha, but he had status. You haven't. And we obviously are Chayav Misa, we must be in any case liable to die. And God has many ways to kill us, many wild animals could kill us. You know why he selected you? To punish you for our deaths. And the next line of the Gemara tells us, he went and killed them. And as he'd done the action of terrible, gruesome death on these two emissaries came from Rome and killed him. That was Yom Terainus. One of the most difficult Gemaras that I've seen for a long time. Why was it a celebration? It was a day the rabbis marked not to fast because Tyrannus had died. These two tzaddikim had died. What a tragedy. What an enormous loss to Klal Yisrael. You can't fast? It should be a day of fasting, of slichas, for all time. So some Meforshim say that the celebration was the decrees, the harsh decrees he'd enacted were cancelled. But it seems the Gemara is telling us something more as well. From the very conversation that went on is recorded, every word of their conversation. Chazal seem to be telling us that for two brothers, two otherwise ordinary members of Klal Yisrael, who'd become so extraordinary, so outstanding in their deaths, who left a legacy for a whole nation, thousands of years later to be inspired by Kiddush Hashem and to know that life and death is in God's hands, and to die al Kiddush Hashem realizing that I have a purpose and I'm serving Hashem by Him taking my life if that's what He wishes. But I'll never lose my faith. They became the lightning rods for the greatest lesson of Kiddush Hashem. They became the examples, the primary precedents for all of Klal Yisrael to be inspired by in Fort 9, in Baranovich. And on a dusty road outside Hebron. I think perhaps the hardest thing that we've all felt, maybe I've heard something not everybody's heard of, but the last day or two it emerged, the phone call which these boys made, which Gilad had made, I think it was. And you hear an operator misunderstanding the words chatfuoti, and you hear bullets, and you hear aye. And you think on the other side of the line there's somebody, how can you miss what's going on? And for 18 days we were crying and Tehillim and Tfilis and all that's gone on. And they weren't alive, it seems. Tragic, it seems, indifference. I spoke today to a very close friend of mine. Rav Hanan Eletrog is the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Shavei Hebron. I've had the privilege of visiting the yeshiva each year for at least a Shabbos over the last 7 or 8 years. And that's where Eyal Yifrach learned. You know what he told me? He said the greatest nes, the greatest siyata deshmaya, the greatest hand of God that happened in these last 3 weeks was the fact that that operator misunderstood and didn't answer that boy. I said, how can you say that? And he said, you know, nirtzechu al hamakom, they were le'oleinu, dead on the spot. But because of that misunderstanding, he told me, for 18 days, tefillahs have been poured out. Unity is being created in unprecedented ways. Avowed secularists have found tefillah. A nation has come together in prayer and desperation, and now in grief. He said, "אתה יכול לחשוב על איזה זכות יותר גדולה בשביל הנשמות?" Can we think of any greater merit for those neshamas than what they've done to Klal Yisrael by one operator not understanding? If they'd have got the message, they'd have caught the people, la'achar ma'isa, unfortunately, tragically too late. But the 18 days of growth would never have been there. Said Bechanelo, please tell people what a zchut those neshamot have, that operator didn't understand the call after it was too late. But it wasn't too late for 18 days of Avodat Hashem, Avat Yisrael, Avas Yisrael, Achdus in unity, and growth as a nation. When I heard this, I got such nechoma after hearing that phone call and hearing his response, and having met the boys in the environment of the yeshiva, and seeing how they put their lives on the line, their Mesiras Nefesh for Torah, and learning with such hasmoda, with a gun on the side, with such pride in Ir HaAvot in Hebron, you realize what the Kedusha, what the holiness, what the Kiddush Shem Shamayim, the connection those neshamas have made for all of Klal Yisrael. How ordinary people became extraordinary agents of Klal Yisrael, of raising a whole nation. I finish off with one thought. The Chavetz Chaim says that in Bilam's long list of klolos turned to brachos, of curses turned to blessings, he mentions Ki lo nachash b'Yaakov v'lo kesem b'Yisrael. There is no divination in Klal Yisrael, no sorcery. Ka'is ye'omer le'Yaakov ul Yisrael ma'po'al kel. Kois, as now too, at this time, it is said to Yaakov and asked of Yisrael, Ma po'al kel, what is God doing? Rashi gives two interpretations. One is that le'osid lovoi, in times to come, Klal Yisrael, our nation, having been purified through thousands of years of the crucible of exile, will be closer to God than the angels. They'll have to consult us as to what's going on in the divine plan. A second interpretation is Kais, as now, even now, Hashem is sending us direction. The Chavetz Chaim highlights one word, however. He omer li Yaakov uli Yisrael, ma po'al kel. Ma, what, or that which, has different connotations. He says we find the word ma as what on earth? What is it? Ma Hashem shel mimoch. What does God want from us? A huge question mark. A small point we don't understand. Ma. But we find the term ma in a different connotation as well entirely. We say it in davening each day. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem. How numerous are your works. We say on Shabbos, Ma godlu ma'asecha. How great. Ma'oid amku mach shvoisecha. Your thoughts and plans are that deep and profound, they defy any human comprehension. Ma, how great, with an exclamation mark afterwards. As the Chavetz Chaim, the same word. But the question is it followed by a question mark or an exclamation mark? Says the Chavetz Chaim, we're in Golus and we have so many question marks. Ma po'al kel, how on earth did God let this happen? How is it possible young boys are murdered in cold blood and a murderous world blames us? How is it that the headlines scream the terrible actions in Yerushalayim of a non-Jew is killed? Terrible actions, but that's the whole concern now of the world. And about the cycle of violence and restraint. Ma po'al kel, how come? How do we understand this? After Fort 9, after Baranovich and after a Holocaust, after 1948, and after every single battle, and how much blood is soaked into our holy land. Ma po'al kel. Says the Chavetz Chaim, there'll be a time we'll say, Ma po'al kel. Look what God did. How great it was. God had a plan. We don't understand the plan in real time. But there'll be a time we'll stand back in astonishment and see three extraordinary boys, ordinary boys who came extraordinary shluchim of Klal Yisrael. Outstanding, unique neshomas. Through that experience and through what they brought about through their short lives, achieved more than any person we know could bring about in a lifetime, such unity in Klal Yisrael. And when we see that as a direct implication, a direct corollary of this sacrifice, Nishto Gedach should never happen, but of this sacrifice, and of the emunah of their parents notwithstanding, we see imminently a time of comfort for all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, when we see a Beis Hamikdash shining and rebuilt, and Torah restored to Klal Yisrael, unity remaining permanently, with the oil, the light of that Kedusha on every face, we'll say, Ma po'al kel. How great, how unbelievable. We could never understand. We're creatures, not creators. We can't fathom a Holocaust. We can't fathom suffering. 3 boys. Yet God knew what he was doing. Ma po'al kel. Look what God did throughout this time. Yirotz maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will. Exactly as Chief Rabbis mentioned, in terms of achdus and unity, the importance of stressing that unity by avoiding, more important than anything else, forms of communication which they call Twitter. The epitome of how Chazal describe Lashon Hara. Dvarim shel ma b'kach, twitterings, like chirping like a bird. But unifying through avoiding negative talk about others. And as Hananel asked me today, to echo the words of Chief Rabbi, in the yeshiva over the last 3 weeks, nobody went out. They didn't leave their Beis Medrash. They didn't leave their place of learning. And they learned non-stop in the merit of their brother and brothers. that koyach HaTorah, that sense of being unified with our heritage, unified as a people around that heritage. May we merit to strengthen ourselves in these areas. And as a result, merit to be really, truly unified, not in tragedy, but in triumph. Not with tears, or not tears of suffering, but tears of joy. Hazarim bedimo berino yiktzeinu. And we are united with Hashem in the merit of these three, of Eyal, Gilad, and Naftali, Zechroin, Tzadikim, V'Kedoshim, Livrocha, Hashem Yinkem Domam, V'Vias Mashiach Tzidkeinu, B'Mheira, V'Yomeinu, Amen.